The city of Milwaukee was breathing under the heavy blanket of a hot June night in 1991. Neon signs buzzed and flickered over cracked sidewalks, casting sickly colors over the empty streets. Somewhere in the crumbling heart of the city, inside a dingy apartment building that reeked of mold and stale beer, a door creaked open to swallow another soul. His name was Konorak Synthesymphone, 14 years old, a sweet, shy boy, small for his age, with a wide smile and a soft voice. That night, he wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to step foot into Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. But fate is cruel and monsters are real. Jeffrey watched Konorak as he sipped the drug-laced drink, the boy's eyes growing heavy, his speech slurring. There was a sick joy in Dahmer's chest, twisted excitement he could barely contain. It was all so easy now, too easy. Outside, the city slept. No one would hear the cries. No one would save him. The nightmare had begun long before Konorak ever walked through that door. It had started years ago, hidden behind a facade of ordinary loneliness and gnawing urges. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, awkward, a face no one remembered, had perfected the art of hunting. Bars, bus stations, malls, anywhere he could find the lost, the lonely, the trusting. Inside apartment 213, Konorak's world blurred. The walls seemed to breathe. The air tasted metallic. Jeffrey smiled and picked up the hammer from the table. "I'll make it quick," he whispered, though he knew it would be a lie. The morning after, neighbors complained about the smell. It was sickening, a rot that seeped into the hallways, clinging to the peeling paint and cracked floors. But complaints were nothing new in the Oxford apartments. The building was a tomb of broken lives, a place where cries for help drowned in the ocean of indifference. No one came. Inside, Jeffrey cleaned with cold precision. He had his methods: bleach, acid, knives that slid through bone like butter. He spoke to the empty room as he worked, whispering apologies to the dead. Or maybe he was apologizing to himself. The head was placed carefully in the freezer. It would join the others soon enough. Weeks earlier, Jeffrey had almost been caught. A man named Tracy Edwards had sat in that same living room, feeling the suffocating heat, the creeping terror. Tracy had fought, he had survived. He had escaped. But no one wanted to listen to the story of a black man accusing a white man of horror. So Jeffrey kept hunting. He was meticulous. He was methodical. But every monster has a flaw. Jeffrey's was loneliness. He didn't kill for anger, not for hatred. He killed because he couldn't stand to be alone. He killed to create living mannequin silent, obedient companions who would never abandon him. He wanted them to stay forever. And in Milwaukee, a city that turned its face from the poor, the marginalized, the broken, Jeffrey Dahmer thrived. Down in the bowels of the city, whispers began. Missing posters curled on lampposts, rain-slicked and torn. Mothers wept into their hands. Fathers roamed the streets with pictures of smiling sons. The community knew something was wrong. The police, mostly, did not listen. In fact, on that sweltering night when Konorak stumbled into the streets, naked and bleeding, to women Sandra Smith and Nicole Childress had called 911, had begged for help. They had watched in horror as two officers arrived and handed the disoriented boy back to Jeffrey Dahmer. Just a lover's quarrel, they joked, laughing as they drove away. An hour later, Konorak was dead. The freezer was filling up. The walls were closing in. The monster was losing control. Inside apartment 213, time had rotted along with the flesh. The air itself was thick, syrupy, heavy with the odor of decay. It clung to the curtains, seeped into the carpet, and oozed from the blood-stained mattress Jeffrey slept on. Flies buzzed lazily against the windows, a constant low hum of death. But to Jeffrey, it was home. He sat in the middle of the living room, shirtless, skin gleaming with sweat. Around him were trophies, skulls, bones, photographs, each one frozen in the perfect moment between life and death. He had turned his home into a mausoleum, a place where loneliness was defeated by bodies that could never leave him. He spoke to them sometimes. "Stay with me," he whispered to the empty skulls lined neatly along the TV. "Please don't leave." They didn't answer, but in his mind, they loved him. They needed him as much as he needed them. The world outside continued spinning, indifferent. Summer wore on, the heat wave baking the city like a corpse in the sun. Milwaukee's police were too busy, too overwhelmed, too uncaring to notice the monster living among them. Jeffrey went back to the bars. He prowled the night like a shark in bloody water, eyes always scanning for his next companion. That's where he found Matt Turner. 17 years old, homeless, vulnerable, perfect. Matt didn't even see it coming. Jeffrey's hands were gentle at first, friendly. By the time Matt realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The drinks, the drugs, the cold kiss of the handcuffs snapping shut. Inside the apartment, Jeffrey whispered promises as he injected acid into Matt's brain, trying to create his perfect living doll. Matt shuddered once, twice, then went still, another silent friend for the collection. The city buzzed and roared around him, but Jeffrey barely noticed anymore. He lived inside his own sick kingdom now, surrounded by the dead, yet cracks were forming in the walls of his mind. He started drinking more, blacking out, forgetting where he left the bodies. Sometimes he would wake to find parts of them in the wrong rooms, or worse, parts missing entirely. One night, he woke up to find himself standing in the kitchen, knife in hand, covered in blood he didn't remember spilling. He laughed and wept at the same time. But somewhere, deep down, Jeffrey knew it couldn't last forever. One night, after disposing of another boy whose name he never even asked, he sat in the flickering light of the television and thought about the police. He thought about Tracy Edwards, the one who had gotten away. He thought about the women who had tried to save Iraq. He thought about the smell in his apartment, growing stronger and stronger, impossible to hide. Sooner or later, someone would come. He wondered if he would be ready. Meanwhile, inside the police department, a few quiet voices were starting to rise. Detective Patrick Kennedy sat at his desk, staring at a stack of missing persons reports. Young men, black, brown, gay, poor, all vanished within a few square miles. It wasn't a pattern the department wanted to see, but Kennedy saw it, and he was beginning to ask questions. Back at apartment 213, Jeffrey stared into the black eyes of a severed head resting inside his fridge. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, though he didn't know if he was apologizing to the dead or himself. There was no turning back now, only deeper into the darkness. July 22nd, 1991. The city steamed under a sweltering sun, the air thick like boiling soup. In the heart of Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer prepared for another night of hunting. But tonight would be different. Tonight, the monster would finally bleed. Inside apartment 213, Jeffrey adjusted the cuffs on his belt. The handcuffs were polished, gleaming. Beside them, a gleaming butcher's knife lay on the table, catching flashes of the setting sun through the grimy window. He was ready. At Club 219, Tracy Edwards was trying to disappear into the crowd. Tall, thin, charming, survivor. Tracy was no fool. Life had taught him to read danger in a man's eyes. But when Jeffrey Dahmer approached him, offering money for some photos, just a few harmless pictures, it didn't seem like danger. It seemed like a way to eat tonight. Against the background of thumping bass and flashing lights, Tracy said yes. Inside the cab ride to apartment 213, something gnawed at Tracy's gut. The man sitting next to him seemed off. Too quiet, too intense. But it was just pictures, right? When they entered the apartment, the stench hit Tracy like a fist. A sickly sweet rot, thick enough to taste. Candles burned everywhere, cheap attempts to mask the odor of death. On the walls, posters of muscular men stared down blankly, their glossy faces warped by heat. Tracy's instincts screamed at him to leave, but Jeffrey smiled and handed him a drink. "Relax," he said, voice syrupy, sticky. Within minutes, Tracy realized the drink was spiked. His head swam. The room tilted. Jeffrey's smile cracked into something twisted, alien. Suddenly, Tracy felt the cold steel of a knife pressing against his chest. "If you do what I say," Jeffrey whispered, "you won't get hurt." Tracy nodded, playing along, heart pounding like a drum inside his skull. Jeffrey tried to handcuff him only, managing to get one wrist locked before Tracy subtly resisted. They sat together on the couch, the TV playing The Exorcist 3 in the background. Jeffrey rocked back and forth, muttering to himself about power, about souls, about controlling people. Tracy watched him, waiting, measuring, looking for an opening, waiting for a mistake. Jeffrey's mood swung wildly, one moment affectionate, the next chillingly cold. At one point, he rested his head against Tracy's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I'm going to eat your heart," he said softly. Tracy smiled weakly. He needed to survive. He needed to escape. After an eternity, Jeffrey stood up, muttering about taking more photos. That was the moment. With every ounce of strength left in his spinning body, Tracy punched Jeffrey square in the face and sprinted for the door. Jeffrey lunged after him, but Tracy was faster, fueled by pure terror. He tore through the apartment, yanking the locked door open, stumbling into the blinding sunlight of the hallway. He ran like the devil was behind him. Two police officers, Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller, cruised nearby when they saw him half naked, cuff dangling from one wrist. Wild-eyed, he ran straight to them, shouting, begging, gasping for breath. "He tried to kill me. He's got bodies in there. You have to come. You have to come now." At first, they thought he was just another drunk, another crazy, but the terror in Tracy's voice was undeniable. They followed him. Back at apartment 213, Jeffrey opened the door, trying to play it cool. "Just a misunderstanding," he said. "Lovers spat, no big deal." The officers, skeptical but curious, stepped inside. The smell hit them instantly. Then, one officer noticed something strange. A few Polaroid photographs on the dresser. Photographs so horrifying, posed bodies, mutilated corpses, dismembered limbs, that even seasoned cops nearly vomited on the spot. The spell broke. Guns drawn, they tackled Jeffrey to the ground as he struggled weakly, muttering, "For what I did, I should be dead." Inside the refrigerator, they found a human head, wide-eyed and frozen in silent scream. In the freezer, wrapped packages of flesh. In the closet, boxes of bones. In the bedroom, a 57-gallon drum filled with acid and decomposing torsos. The house of horrors was real, and the monster was finally caught. As they led him out in handcuffs, a small crowd began to gather. Neighbors peeked from windows. Mothers pulled their children close. Jeffrey Dahmer quiet, polite Jeffrey, was led away like a drowning man slipping beneath the surface. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The interrogation room smelled of metal and cold sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering weakly. Jeffrey Dahmer sat slumped in a plastic chair, wrists cuffed to a steel ring bolted into the table. His eyes were vacant, hollow, like he was already half dead. Detective Patrick Kennedy sat across from him, tape recorder clicking to life. "Tell me everything," Kennedy said. Jeffrey raised his head, his voice soft. "I will," he said. "I want to." And so the confessions began. At first, it came in trickles, disjointed memories, half-formed sentences. But once the dam broke, the horrors poured out like black water. He told them about the first kill. Stephen Hicks, 1978. A hitchhiker he picked up, lured back to his parents' house. They drank beer, talked about girls. When Stephen tried to leave, Jeffrey bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, then strangled him with the bar. Afterward, he dissected the body, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them in the woods behind his house. He was 18 years old. The detectives exchanged glances, silent, grim. It got worse, much worse. Jeffrey described his rituals with chilling calmness. How he lured young men with promises of money, drinks, photos. How he drugged them, sometimes within minutes of arriving home. How he murdered them quickly, almost tenderly. Strangulation was his preferred method. No blood, no screaming, just silence. And then the real horror began. He spoke of experiments, injecting boiling water or acid into the brains of his victims to create zombies, obedient living puppets who would never leave him. None of them survived. He described dismemberments in clinical detail, the way flesh separated from bone, the sound of tendons snapping, the smell of organs spilling onto cheap linoleum floors. He kept trophy skulls, hearts, genitals, preserving them in jars of formaldehyde, freezing them, sometimes even eating them. He was ashamed. But also not. "It made me feel like they were still with me," he said, voice flat. "It made me feel less alone." Detectives struggled to stay composed. Some left the room to vomit. Others just stared at the walls, silent. Jeffrey listed names when he could remember them. Faces blurred together. So many boys, so many men. Young, beautiful, trusting, gone. He showed them photographs, hundreds of Polaroids, bodies bent into unnatural shapes, smiles frozen in terror, corpses posed like sleeping lovers. In one drawer, they found a plan. Drawings for an altar made of bones, skulls, and candles. A throne where he would sit, surrounded by his friends forever. It was madness rendered into blueprints. Hours stretched into days. Jeffrey confessed to everything, every crime, every sin. No excuses, no pleas for mercy. Only the cold, simple truth of a man who had become a monster. At one point, Detective Kennedy asked, "Why, Jeff? Why did you do it?" Jeffrey stared at him for a long time, then said, "I wanted them to stay. I didn't want them to leave." A child's answer, whispered from the mouth of a devil. The public exploded when news broke. Milwaukee boiled over with rage, horror, grief. Families of the victims wept openly on television. Protesters marched through the streets, screaming for justice. The LGBTQ community, long ignored and persecuted, cried out in anguish, warning that if someone had listened, these boys might still be alive. And through it all, Jeffrey sat silently, watching the storm he had created, unmoving, unfeeling, dead inside. His trial was set. The world demanded blood. The monster of Milwaukee was about to face judgment. But even in chains, the darkness around Jeffrey Dahmer only grew thicker. It would claim more lives before the end. January 13th, 1992. Snow buried Milwaukee in white silence, but inside the courthouse, the air boiled with anger and sorrow. Reporters swarmed like vultures. Families of victims clutched each other, eyes burning with hatred and heartbreak. Everyone had come to see the monster caged. Jeffrey Dahmer sat quietly at the defense table, wearing a blue shirt and glasses, looking more like a shy office worker than one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. The disconnect was nauseating. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Michael McCann, laid out the nightmare for the jury. 17 victims, 17 lives stolen, 17 families shattered. Photographs of body parts, skulls, acid barrels were passed around like artifacts from hell. The words evil, inhuman, monster echoed through the courtroom. But Jeffrey didn't flinch. Not once. His defense attorney, Gerald Boyle, didn't try to claim innocence. Everyone knew Jeffrey Dahmer had done these things. There was no mystery, no debate. The only question was he sane when he did it? Boyle's argument was chilling in its own right. Only someone utterly insane could commit these acts. Only a mind broken beyond repair could live in a house of corpses and call it home. They weren't asking for freedom. They were asking for life in a mental institution. The prosecution disagreed. Jeffrey Dahmer knew exactly what he was doing. He lured victims with calculated charm. He concealed evidence with cold precision. He acted to fulfill deep, monstrous desires, but desires he understood, desires he hid from others. That was not madness, that was evil. Premeditated, deliberate, sane. Witnesses were called. Tracy Edwards, the man who had escaped and ended it all, stood and faced the monster. His voice shook as he described the handcuffs, the knife, the whispered threats to eat his heart. The jury hung on every word. Mothers of the dead testified too, their voices cracking, faces wet with tears. "You took my baby," one mother sobbed, pointing at Jeffrey with a trembling hand. "You took him and you threw him away like garbage." Jeffrey stared at the table, silent. He never apologized. Not yet. Then came the psychiatric experts. Some said he was a schizophrenic, a necrophiliac gripped by uncontrollable urges. Others said he was cold, methodical, manipulative. Back and forth they fought, painting conflicting portraits of a man whose true face no one could seem to capture. Monster or madman, devil or disease. The jury would decide. Outside the courthouse, the crowd grew restless. Chants of death penalty echoed off the frozen walls. Signs called him a demon, a disgrace, an abomination. Milwaukee, bleeding from invisible wounds, demanded vengeance. Inside, on the final day of testimony, Jeffrey Dahmer finally spoke. His voice was flat, emotionless. "I know what I did was wrong. I wanted to keep them with me. I never wanted them to leave. I tried to create a world of my own. But it collapsed around me." He paused. "I deserve whatever punishment you decide. No excuses, no pleas for mercy. Just the naked, horrifying truth of a man who had walked willingly into hell and dragged others with him." The jury deliberated for 5 hours. 5 hours to weigh the fate of a monster. When they returned, the verdict was read. Guilty, sane. 15 consecutive life sentences. 937 years behind bars. There would be no freedom, no second chances, only endless, rotting time. As the judge passed sentence, He addressed Jeffrey directly. "This is not for punishment. This is to ensure you never have another victim." Jeffrey nodded slightly, accepting it, almost relieved. When they led him away, shackled and surrounded by guards, a woman from the crowd screamed after him, "Burn in hell." Jeffrey didn't react. He simply disappeared down a cold, grey hallway, swallowed by the very system he had long eluded. But even in prison, darkness followed Jeffrey Dahmer like a shadow, and it would catch up to him faster than anyone expected. Columbia Correctional Institution, Portage, Wisconsin. A fortress of steel and concrete, built to cage monsters. And inside, in a small, windowless cell, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer became inmate number 003798. He entered prison carrying a reputation that clung to him like rotting flesh. The inmates knew who he was. The guards knew, everyone knew, and no one forgot. At first, Jeffrey was placed in solitary confinement. For his own safety, they said. 23 hours a day. Locked alone with only the sound of his own breath and the steady drip-drip of a leaking pipe. It suited him. In the silence, his mind turned inward, gnawing at itself. He thought about the victims. He thought about their faces, their bodies, their screams. Sometimes he smiled. More often, he wept. After a year, Jeffrey requested to be moved into the general population. He said he wanted to live like everyone else. Take the consequences. Prison officials hesitated. They warned him it would be dangerous, but Jeffrey insisted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was a death wish. Maybe he just didn't care anymore. Life among the inmates was brutal. Whispers followed him down every corridor. Eyes burned holes into his back. Shoves and punches came quick and without warning. Freak, monster, baby killer. He ate alone. He exercised alone. At night, he lay awake, feeling hatred radiate from every cell around him like heat from a furnace. He was a ghost haunting a graveyard of the damned, and everyone wanted him dead. Jeffrey developed strange habits. He made macabre jokes in the lunchroom, shaping his food into body parts, pretending to pour blood over it. He seemed to enjoy the horror he caused. Sometimes the guards laughed. Most times they just looked away. Inside, Jeffrey rotted, and he knew it. Surprisingly, Jeffrey found God behind bars. He began studying the Bible obsessively, clinging to verses like a drowning man grabbing at driftwood. He was baptized in the prison whirlpool, a ceremony witnessed only by a handful of skeptics. Was it redemption, or just one more performance? Only Jeffrey knew, and he wasn't telling. But while he sought salvation, others plotted vengeance. One of them was Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate doing time for murder. Scarver was different from the others, quiet, cold, burning with righteous fury. He believed he had been chosen by God to punish the wicked, and in his mind, there was no one more wicked than Jeffrey Dahmer. On the morning of November 28th, 1994, opportunity knocked. Jeffrey Scarver and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, were assigned to clean the prison gymnasium. No guards watched them closely. No cameras recorded. Just 3 men, 3 broken souls, and a reckoning long overdue. Scarver struck first. He picked up a metal bar from a nearby machine and swung it with all his strength. The first blow crushed Jesse Anderson's skull. The second blow sent Jeffrey Dahmer sprawling across the cold, blood-slicked floor. But Scarver wasn't finished. He stood over Dahmer, breathing heavily. "You disgusting piece of shit," he said. Then he swung again, and again, and again, until there was nothing left of the monster but a shattered, twitching corpse. When guards finally arrived, it was too late. Jesse Anderson died later in the hospital. Jeffrey Dahmer was pronounced dead at the scene. Blunt force trauma to the head. 42 blows. Poetic justice, some said. Brutal vengeance, others whispered. Either way, it was over. News of Dahmer's death spread like wildfire. Some celebrated, some mourned the waste of human life. Most just breathed a little easier, knowing the monster was gone. Gone, but never forgotten. Because nightmares, like Jeffrey Dahmer, don't die easily. They linger in the dark, in the silence, in the spaces between heartbeat and breath, waiting, watching, whispering. Even after death, Jeffrey Dahmer's shadow stretched long over Milwaukee. It clung to the city's streets like fog. It seeped into every whispered conversation, every glance over the shoulder. It turned laughter into unease, silence into terror. Milwaukee would never be the same. Families of the victims bore the deepest scars. They tried to move on, tried to live normal lives. But how do you heal from a wound carved into your soul? How do you breathe when the one you loved is reduced to a name on a police report, a bone fragment in a box? Catherine Lacey, mother of victim Curtis Straughter, rarely spoke in public. But at a memorial service in 1995, she stood behind the podium, voice trembling. My boy had a smile that could light up the world. Now he's just a memory because of him. She didn't have to say Jeffrey Dahmer's name. Everyone knew. The city tried to erase the stains. Oxford Apartments, the site of the horror, was demolished in 1992, reduced to rubble and dust. Where once young men had laughed, dreamed, and died, there was now only a vacant lot. Grass grew wild over the foundations. The wind whispered through broken fences. Some called it cursed ground. No one dared build anything there. The police department also bore deep, ugly wounds. The case exposed brutal failures, apathy, negligence, prejudice. Officers had ignored the cries of a 14-year-old boy, Connor Axine, who fled from Dahmer's apartment naked and bleeding. They returned him to Dahmer's custody. Hours later, he was dead. The officers were fired, later reinstated. Public trust shattered like glass and never fully healed. The LGBTQ+ community grieved in silence and rage. Many of Dahmer's victims had been gay men of color, already marginalized, already invisible. Their disappearances were ignored, their lives treated as disposable. Dahmer hadn't hunted them at random. He had chosen them because he knew no one was looking. That ugly truth burned hotter than any headline. It still burns. Books were written, movies were made. Documentaries dissected every grim detail. Some portrayed Dahmer as a monster. Others hinted at sympathy, a broken boy twisted by a monstrous world. Debate raged. Was he born evil, made evil? Could he have been stopped? The questions echoed unanswered through decades. His personal effects, his photos, his tools of death were ordered destroyed, burned, melted, erased. But memory is not so easily purged. The nightmare lingered. It still does. In the years following Dahmer's death, strange stories circulated. Visitors to the site where Oxford Apartments once stood reported hearing footsteps at night, soft crying, whispers. Some said they saw figures moving among the weeds, young men with hollow eyes, beckoning. A memorial was proposed, then abandoned. No one wanted to enshrine the horror. Better, some said, to let it rot and vanish. But nightmares don't vanish. They just change shape. Parents still warn their children about strangers. Bars still close their doors a little earlier. Young men still glance over their shoulders on lonely streets. Some wounds never fully close. Some monsters never fully die. They haunt the corners of memory, the cold spaces of the world, waiting, always waiting. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was gone, but the terror he birthed lives on, an invisible legacy written in blood and grief. And sometimes, late at night, when the city falls silent and the darkness feels too heavy to bear, Milwaukee remembers. It remembers the monster it once harbored, and it prays it will never see his like again. Years have passed since Jeffrey Dahmer's death, but his legacy remains like an open wound, raw and unhealed. The world has moved on, but some stories never fade. They linger, turning like whispers in the dark, never fully silenced. For those who lived through his reign of terror, for the families who lost loved ones, the passage of time does little to ease the pain. The monster may be gone, but the question lingers in the back of their minds. How could this have happened? The question haunts more than just the victims' families. It haunts us all. It's a question we all fear to ask, but one that's impossible to ignore. What makes a monster? Dahmer's story is one that leaves us trembling at the abyss. His monstrous acts were not born from some foreign land, some strange place or mysterious entity. No, Dahmer was made here, in our own backyard. Born in Milwaukee, raised in the heart of the American Midwest. He was a child once, an innocent boy, living in a world that should have protected him. But somewhere along the way, that innocence died, and in its place, something monstrous grew. But what if, at some point, Dahmer was just a regular man? What if, at some point, he was just a human being, like us, with hopes, fears, and desires? At what point does a person cross the line from being human to being something else? Something unrecognizable, something terrifying. The question of nature versus nurture looms large in the aftermath of Dahmer's crimes. Was he born this way? Or was it the broken pieces of his past, the abuse, the neglect, the silence that twisted his mind beyond repair? Dahmer's parents failed him. His father, Lionel, was distant, obsessed with his scientific work, leaving Jeffrey to grow up in a world of isolation. His mother, Joyce, was emotionally erratic, plagued by her own demons. They fought, they divorced. Jeffrey was left alone, lost in the void. His childhood was marked by strange obsessions, a fascination with death, and an overwhelming need for control. A need to possess, a need to make the world his own. But was it just his upbringing? Is that all it took to create a monster? No. There's something deeper, darker, at play. Jeffrey Dahmer was a man who once spoke of loneliness as if it were his only companion. He wanted to be loved, but love, for him, was twisted. A possession, a claim over the body, over the soul. He said once, "I wanted them to stay with me. I didn't want them to leave." The need for connection became a suffocating desire. But where others sought closeness, he sought control. And with control came death. For those who survived, the scars run deep. The families of the victims still live with the unbearable weight of their loss. They can't forget, they won't forget. And the survivors, the ones who escaped, they live with the ghosts of their near-death experiences, carrying the trauma in every step. Christopher Scarver, the inmate who killed Dahmer, later spoke about the event with a chilling clarity. He said he had been chosen by God to punish Dahmer. "I was told by God to do it," Scarver said, "to bring justice." But was it justice? Was it revenge? Or was it just another tragedy in a string of endless tragedies? For some, Dahmer's death was a form of closure. For others, it was simply another cycle of violence that had no end. Dahmer's legacy, however, isn't just in his death. It's in the questions he left behind. Could he have been stopped? Could anyone have seen the warning signs before it was too late? And more haunting still, could this happen again? The world we live in today is different from the world in which Jeffrey Dahmer was born. We have more awareness, more understanding of mental illness, of the signs of predatory behavior. But are we truly safer? Are we really any closer to understanding what makes a person like Dahmer? Or are we just fooling ourselves? Perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is this. What if there's another Jeffrey Dahmer out there right now, waiting, watching, planning, a monster waiting to be born? We can't know, we can't predict it, and that's the scariest thing of all. Jeffrey Dahmer's life and death have become a permanent part of the American consciousness, a dark stain that we can never fully wash away, a cautionary tale that echoes through every horror story, every true crime documentary, every whispered conversation at the dinner table. He will never truly be gone, not for those who lived through it, not for the victims, not for the survivors, and certainly not for the rest of us. There's a place, somewhere in the deep corners of the human soul, where the monsters lie waiting. A place where the lines between humanity and monstrosity blur. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. Jeffrey Dahmer crossed that line long ago, and in doing so, he showed us the darkness that lies within all of us. The darkness that can take root and grow quietly, unnoticed until it becomes something no one can stop. The question is, how much of that darkness is already inside you?